When we're creating a chart, we're trying to tell a story and we want to highlight specific data. And one thing that I found really helpful when creating an area chart is to create some kind of gradient with the color. That way we can highlight specific data. So we can do that with, again, we can use React if we're creating a JSX code, or we can do it with D3 if we just adding appending a linear gradient. So if you look at our SVG cheat sheet, and you can see there's a linear gradient that you could set the stop position and the color we're using, and then we can use that as a fill URL, and then we can create a gradient. So let's do that. In order to do that, we'll take our SVG element and we're going to append a linear gradient, and then we'll set the attribute to linear gradient, and we'll set the attribute, let's call it gradient. That attribute, we're going to attach it when we finish to our fill. Okay, and now what we need to do, we need to set our stops. So what we're going to do, we're going to select all. We'll set them after those elements enter the screen. So we know they're going to be called stop because we're going to set them. And then we need to set our data. That's going to be our stop, our offset stops, and the color we're going to be using. So we can create as many data points as we want. Each array is going to consist of an offset with the percentage that we want it to go to and the color we want to be using. So my color, we can use 2 colors, 3 colors, whatever we want. What we can do is, and the percentage of how much of that color we're going to be using. So I'm going to create a constant, let's call it color, and our color is going to be, again, tomato. And we need to open and close a bracket. Okay, and we need a comma. Okay, looking good. So this is our first color with the offset. Then we can create as many of those as we want. Let's create 2 more. But I'm sure it's going to complain about, yeah, we need to fix the formatting. So I'm setting from 0 with 50, and the next offset would be 100% with the color we're using. And the last one, no, that should be the second, right? So we want the 100% with our color. And then we can set 50% with a color of 50. So the first one should be transparent, because we're starting from the 0, so the 0 should be transparent. The 50% should be with the color 50%, and the 100% should be with the color, and we can collapse that because it's a object shorthand. Okay, and our transparent, we don't need template format. Okay, so now that we have the data, we can use the enter once it gets added to our DOM, and then we can append those stop elements. Remember, we select them here and we're setting them here, and then we can set an attribute for our offset that we're going to use the data we set with the callback, and in the callback we're just going to return the data offset, and we need to do the same with an attribute for the color. So we're going to set a stop color attribute using a data and a callback that would return the dcolor. And now we can replace our tomato fill with our element, SVG element we created, and we need to put it inside of a URL. And let's take a look. Here we go. So you can see we have a gradient, but our gradient is going from left to right. And in this specific chart, it doesn't really help us much to highlight some point. It would be much more helpful if it's showing the the high price level versus just gradient like that from left to right. So we're in a better shape if we're showing a gradient that goes from 0 and become redder or greener, whatever color we want to use in our chart to highlight those areas. So to do that, we need to add a couple of things. What we need to do is we need to go back into our linear gradient, and we need to add a couple of attributes. We need to add an attribute that's called gradient units, and we want to specify what kind of units we're going to be using. So we can use user space on use, and if you look at Mozilla, there is a gradient unit that it shows what it stands for. It's defined the coordinate system that the user is used for that, and we can either use space on use or use bounding box. So you can go to Mozilla and read about it. There's different ways you can do a gradient, a radial gradient. In our case, it makes more sense to use the user space on use. And then what we need to do is we need to set the XY and the X2. So just add an attribute for X1, and we need an attribute for X2. For the X1, what we're going to be using is we're just going to use 0 for the X1, and for the X2 we'll use also 0, because we want to change only the Y. We don't care about. And then for the Y1 and Y2 we need to set the same thing. So we need to set the beginning and the end. So let's set Y1 and Y2. And here, because we want to draw it, we're going to need to use the scale. So we're going to use the Y scale of the 0 position, because we want the first Y to start from 0. And then the second Y, we want it to be at the height of our bounded area. So that way, take a look. Here we go. So we're starting from 0, and you can see at the top we get it more red. Now if we want to make it more meaningful, instead of making it all red at the top, we can do height, for example, -25, and that's going to take it a little bit down, you can see, or even 50. There you go. And then we get more highlighted, the top area of the price over time versus a linear, and our chart becomes much more meaningful because it's easier to read.